Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Precursor civilizations. I've been down a rabbit hole of reading about ancient aliens, origin legends, lost tech, etc. Anyone interested in thoughts, info, or discussion on the more scientifically backed, or at least objective points? I really think a precursor civilization is a good place to start before bringing any ETs into the equation. To me, a few interesting points to start are Younger Drya's impact. Overlapping flood myths. Usually a small group survives to repopulate. Overlapping myths of bringers of knowledge and greater beings helping humans learn cultural skills. Sphinx water damage. Encoded math in dimensions of structures, but this can get pseudoscience-y very quickly. The oldest megastructures often have the most difficult to build architecture, and quality diminishes with time.
So there are several cities that show evidence of large explosions, and in the Mahabharata they talk of massive wars involving the gods and their god-tier weapons. What do you think happened at these places /x/men? An ancient, heavily populated city in Pakistan was instantly destroyed 2,000 years before Christ by an incredible explosion that could only been caused by an atomic bomb. That's the mind-boggling conclusion of a British researcher, David Davenport, who spent 12 years studying ancient Hindu scripts and evidence at the site where the great city, Mohenjo-Daro, once stood. For David Davenport, an English of Indian origins, expert of Sanskrit, a thermonuclear explosion isn't a far hypothesis at all. The description of the immense power of such a weapon were contained in the Mahabharata, section Drona Parva, describing a weapon called Agneya. It was like a shiny rocket whose heat burned the world like a fever. Then, cold winds, cardinal points became clear and lightful. Looking at the burned walls, the second possibility seems the right one. In fact, Indra led a cruel invasion. In the Rig Veda, it's written, "Devast the strong ones like time tears the clothes." Everybody was slaughtered in loco. The final touch was a sudden holocaust of fire. Davenport came back from Pakistan with some sample remains from the city. The CNR led a serious analysis that amazed the researchers. The objects brought by him appeared to be fused, glassified by a heat as high as 1500 Celsius, followed by a sudden cooling. Let's say that no natural phenomena can do the same. For Davenport, the destruction described in the Ramayana of the Danda kingdom were nothing but the end of Mohenjo-Daro, also identified as Lanka, meaning isle, which Mohenjo-Daro was built on. What was found at the site of Mohenjo-Daro corresponds exactly to Nagasaki, declared Davenport, who published his startling findings in an amazing book, Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC, Milan, Italy, 1979. There was an epicenter about 50 yards wide where everything was crystallized, fused, or melted, he said. 60 yards from the center, the bricks are melted on one side, indicating a blast. The horrible, mysterious event of 4,000 years ago that leveled Mohenjo-Daro was recorded in an old Hindu manuscript called the Mahabharata, which has been guarded by holy men for centuries. White-hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes, the account reads. Water-boiled horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. The description concludes, "It was a terrible sight to see. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon." Based on his study of many ancient manuscripts, Davenport believes that the end of Mohenjo-Daro was tied to a state of war between humans. The rulers who controlled regions where space aliens were mining minerals and exploiting other natural resources, he believes. Because it was another group's city, the aliens had agreed to destroy Mohenjo-Daro on their behalf of them. The aliens needed the friendship of the kings so that they could continue their prospecting and research, explained Davenport. The texts tell us that 30,000 inhabitants of the city were given 7 days to get out, a clear warning that everything was about to be destroyed. Obviously, some people didn't heed the warning, because 44 human skeletons were found there in 1927, just a few years after the city was discovered. All the skeletons were flattened to the ground. For example, A father, mother, and child were found flattened in the street, face down and still holding hands. Interestingly, the ancient texts refer repeatedly to the vimanas, or the flying carts which fly under their own power, he added. Davenport's intriguing theory has met with intense interest in the scientific community. Nationally known expert William Sturm said, "The melting of bricks at Mohenjo-Daro could not have been caused by a normal fire," added Professor Antonio Castellani, a space engineer in Rome. "It's possible that what happened at Mohenjo-Daro was not a natural phenomenon." Brief note: Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, Pakistan. David Davenport, 1996, who spent 12 years studying ancient Hindu scripts and evidence at the ancient site of Mohenjo-Daro, declared in 1996 that the city was instantly destroyed around 2000 BC. The city ruins reveal the explosion's epicenter, which measures 50 yards wide. At that location, everything was crystallized, fused, or melted. 60 yards from the center, the bricks were melted on one side, indicating a blast. The horrible, mysterious event of 4,000 years ago was recorded in the Mahabharata. According to that text, white-hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes. Water boiled. Horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. When we read the Mahabharata, we could observe incredible weapons that were very powerful in magnitude, frequently used in the war. The descriptions of these weapons clearly indicates an advanced science that possibly existed. How could this be possible? If we take up the hypothesis that these descriptions were not mere imaginations, then how come such complex technology of manufacturing advanced weapons were known by those ancient people? The weapons used in Mahabharata were a combination of ancient earthly weapons and the highly powerful and advanced futuristic weapons provided by the aliens, especially the various types of astras, missiles, and various types of danush, launchers, of Mahabharata are all provided by the aliens. The description of these weapons clearly makes us to believe that their production requires large-scale industrial infrastructure, involving complex technology and development. To manufacture such advanced weapons, thousands of years of research and development should have taken place. Therefore, it is conclusive that these weapons were received from the aliens and not manufactured in this planet. Mahabharata also provides detailed descriptions of these weapons received from aliens. From a scientific view, descriptions of gods and demigods described in Mahabharata are aliens far more advanced in science, in light years, than us. The aliens provided the asthras and the mantras or passwords to invoke it. Before launching the athras, the invoker chants a mantra with utmost concentration. This may be some sort of telepathic communication to the provider of the weapon, alien, or his control unit. This in turn results in a remote method invocation, as we use in software. Then the astra is navigated and controlled from distant planets or galaxies. Some astras returns back to the person who launches it. Karna, quote, S. Nagasthara, and Krishna's Sudarsana Chakra. This may be similar to the reusable missiles which the Indian Space Research Organization is working on. What about practical control issues? How can the astra be controlled from an extreme distance if the controller has no idea where it's going and what it's doing? It is possible, if we can use Global Positioning System, GPS, aided mapping for the world, then why not aliens with very advanced knowledge use a mapping for our entire galaxy, Milky Way, or even larger area with an advanced science associated with it? The person through telepathy uses the mantra, password, logs in, and then communicates the object to be reached to the controller, and it takes control. The controller need not be a person an alien, but a highly futuristic advanced navigational system. All missiles are not guided and navigated. Most of the missiles are aim and shoot and depends on the precision of the warrior. Some travel very long distance, and that is possible only if some sort of navigational system prevails. The technology might have been much more advanced that even an inbuilt navigational system was available within the missiles. There may also be an biological address, as like an IP address in PC, for each living being, which may be far advanced for us to perceive.
Tully Papyrus, 1500 BC. In the year 22 of the third month of winter,
6th hour of the day, among the scribes of the House of Life, it was found that a strange fiery disk was coming in the sky. It had no head. The breath of its mouth emitted a foul odor. Its body was 1 rod in length and 1 rod in width. It had no voice. It came toward His Majesty's house. Their heart became confused through it, and they fell upon their bellies. They went to the king to report it. His Majesty ordered that the scrolls located in the House of Life be consulted. His Majesty meditated on all these events which were now going on. After several days had passed, they became more numerous in the sky than ever. They shined in the sky more than the brightness of the sun, and extended to the limits of the 4 supports of heaven. Powerful was the position of the fiery disks. The army of the king looked on, with His Majesty in their midst. It was after the evening meal when the disks ascended even higher in the sky to the south. Fish and other volatiles rained down from the sky, a marvel never before known since the foundation of the country. And His Majesty caused incense to be brought to appease the heart of Amun-Re, the god of the 2 lands. And it was ordered that the event be recorded for His Majesty in the annals of the House of Life, to be remembered forever.
As the result of several remote viewing sessions and 3 personal non-terrestrial encounters with 7-foot-tall greys, which includes a lost time event, an historical scenario was displayed to me. I witnessed a colossal disc-shaped craft descend and land in the area of the present-day Nile River Delta. At that time, this location was completely encircled by the Mediterranean Sea, and that this craft was later transformed into a massive and magnificent island. This was the genesis of a great empire that encompassed the surrounding indigenous people and land. The rulers of this empire were the occupants of the craft that landed there. Their knowledge was disseminated throughout the region, and their bloodline was merged with the native people. The aliens communicated to me that this empire was the nexus of several dominant and lesser civilizations. I asked them, was this Atlantis? There was no response to my question. I witnessed representations of various cultures that developed over millennia. Some were brief glimpses of time, while others were mighty empires, but all had a direct connection to the occupants of the craft. There was particular emphasis made to the development of the ancient Egyptians. I observed order created out of chaos, a civilization that was deeply influenced by the beliefs of the extraterrestrials. For thousands of years, there were continued interventions by the alien gods. I was presented with a particular series of events that occurred during Egypt's 18th dynasty. This has been classified as the first dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt, an era in which ancient Egypt achieved the peak of its power. A profound encounter occurred during the reign of Amenhotep III, which greatly affected the royal family and the priesthood. This encounter was interpreted by Amenhotep III as a divine message that the pharaoh was a god that rivaled Amun-Ra and the priesthood. Amenhotep III's display of power and disdain for the priesthood was watched closely by his son Amenhotep IV, who later changed his name to Akhenaten. When Akhenaten became pharaoh, he established a quasi-monotheistic belief in the solar deity Aten, which I believe was a representation of an alien being or craft. What I observed over the years eventually altered my perception of human history, that our past is intertwined with extraterrestrial beings. Modern humans are a genetic extension of otherworldly species. I also believe that most of the alien entities that people encounter are biologically enhanced humans from our past and future.
I can state conclusively that life exists beyond our solar system. It's pretty simple, really. Intelligent life is more rare than simple or animal life. You can safely assume that not all planets that develop life also develop intelligent life. There are at least thousands, but possibly billions of planets with life out there, ranging from planets with simple self-replicating molecules all the way to dinosaur planets and oceanic worlds with sea horrors beyond our imagination. The problem that most people have is that they don't realize how fucking massive the universe is. Just getting to the nearest star is a near impossible task with a high probability of failure. Life is probably spread out quite thin throughout the universe. I would guess the nearest planet with life is hundreds or thousands of light years away, but space is large enough and full of enough opportunities that life can be common, yet be spread far away from each other at the same time.
In AD 1211, Gervase of Tilbury, an English chronicler of historical events and curiosities, recorded this bizarre story. There happened in the borough of Cloera, one Sunday, while the people were at Mass, a marvel. In this town is a church dedicated to Saint Cinaros. It befell that an anchor was dropped from the sky, with a rope attached to it, and one of the flukes caught in the arch above the church door. The people rushed out of the church and saw in the sky a ship with men on board, floating before the anchor cable, and they saw a man leap overboard and jump down to the anchor, as if to release it. He looked as if he were swimming in water. The folk rushed up and tried to seize him, but the bishop forbade the people to hold the man, for it might kill him, he said. The man was freed and hurried up to the ship, where the crew cut the rope and the ship sailed out of sight. But the anchor is in the church and has been there ever since, as a testimony.
My time to shine. Here are several things from my life. A dream I had recently. I dreamt that me and my girlfriend were walking through the entrance, a slim walkway with a 6-foot vertical slat fence either side, of the park near our house at night. This walkway was lit up suddenly and we both said, "Why is there a light? Is it in the park?" When we got to the gate there was silver, very shiny, almost as reflective as a mirror, sort of colander-shaped. Craft sat on the grass. A big flash. Suddenly, I am pinned to a bed in a room I don't recognize or really have a memory of after. Alien beings? Big eyes look like the classic grays, but they're brown and tall, with drier-looking skin, like a tortoise's neck kind of texture, not very waxy. About 5 or 6 of them are shoving something in my mouth, like long-gloved fingers or pairs of socks. I shout "Arr!" as they're doing this. It feels like I've suddenly been thrown into my bed. It's now morning. I wake up suddenly next to my partner and ask her if I just screamed. She said she didn't hear me, but she was already awake. A couple of years ago, I was filming a flock of birds that kept flying in and out of some trees across the valley in slow-mo with my iPhone 7. I was with a friend at a place we used to go to all the time. We both, upon watching the video for the first time, saw an object, black ball, quickly fly from left to right behind the birds. It was very fast, even in slow-mo. I have tens of thousands of photos and videos on my iCloud, so I will have to go back through to find and upload, but I will link this video here when I can. From childhood. When I was a child, I would have a nightmare about a barn owl being at my window. I would shout at my mom and tell her there was an owl that wasn't actually an owl at my window, but it would never be there when she opened the curtains. I also, for some reason at this time, had a crazy fear of seeing rats if I went out in the dark, even though I loved pet rats as a kid and knew a lot of people with them. It's worth noting that when I was 15 or 16, I went to see The Fourth Kind in the cinema. There was a man recounting what he saw. An owl, but it's not an owl. I almost died with fright and I wasn't right for months after that. I was always very scared to go upstairs as a child. It was always cold, even in the summer. I do not like the way the light shines from my mom's window into the hallway. As an adult, it makes me feel like time has stood still. When I was about 14 or 15, I was playing Halo 3 online with a friend on Xbox. Where the TV was at the time, the lounge window was behind it, which points out into the direction of the coast. On a clear day, you can see the sea from the upstairs window, my mom's room, on the same side of the house. My mom is talking on the phone to someone. I am talking on the headset. A low triangular craft with lights on the corners and one in the middle underneath slowly goes from over my house in the direction of the coast. The coast has an inactive army base, Nansakuki, I think it is spelled. This base used to manufacture nerve gas with salvaged Nazi equipment after WW2 and even has a secret submarine hole in the cliff. There are YouTube vids of people exploring it. The sun was setting and it was a brilliant orange sky. I told my friend to hang on a minute and shouted my mom, who did not know what the craft is. I have always been very cosmically aware. Even when I was young, I once read in the paper, I think I was 7, about an asteroid that could hit Earth, and just knowing there was nothing we could do. I remember my mom asking what was wrong. I used to seek out info about aliens and UFOs, etc., even from around that age again. I was obsessed, even though it made me too scared to go to sleep. I have a lump in my neck, about the size of a pea that I can move around freely. Some days it is gone.
Me and a somewhat skeptic friend decided to explore the phenomena. Our method was to use an app, a spirit box. Pair with a channeler of no predisposition. We choose BIP's BCN. It was a random choice. We planned to test other apps. He practiced some meditation beforehand, following the idea that you have to be able to keep a calm and quiet mind and to perform as the channeler. No words repeating itself, diverse topics coming from the app. Whatever came, though, was able to keep a conversation and followed it up. Besides the words coming from the app, he would get clear pictures, sensations, and whatever ideation that complemented the talk. Each time there were different entities self-identifying as different people from different backgrounds and cultures. We set out to talk to anyone who wanted to talk, but were knowledgeable about the subjects. For each session, we had a set of questions following one subject, sometimes many subjects. While we were doing these for our personal fun, like asking spirits for Sasquatch and other things that we knew we were never able to confirm. One day we were contacted by a self-proclaimed Anunnaki. According to him, Anunnaki were how Homo sapiens decided to call them. They are a previous civilization evolved on Earth before us. They are still around. They do interfere in our matters only when someone gets outside and impartial help. Their interaction with us in the beginning was mostly for studies on intelligence, which surprised them. We seemed to adapt super fast. They avoided direct contact and studied us from afar by technological means. They are still around on Earth. Descendants of the previous people, that to me seemed to imply they became something different. They are in direct contact with visitors. The visitors want to contact us, but we are in a kind of a preserve, to keep us not affected by what is happening out there. Humans really did build something Nakavi to our own minds. No one else is to blame. Others might try to move us one way or the other. But the reason for things like, we only get to choose irrelevant person A or the other irrelevant person B, is on us. We built the trap. Contact with the universe at large is being made. But it won't be like an embassy or anything like a good Samaritan could just set on fire or bomb it. These are just my 2 cents to the thread. I personally don't believe some things that were said. He said directly that they were everywhere. When I mentioned the possibility with humans contacting ET that came up many times in our talks, that a thing, an important event would happen, he just responded, "I don't know, wasn't there." At the time, I didn't question it, but I mean, and you can't instantly ask. You are supposedly projecting your mind. But don't have to means to check it out if an event of civilian Homo sapiens actually did contact ET directly. You don't have galactic DuckDuckGo, and you guys are everywhere. So they either lie or omit things. So in conclusion, it was a neat experiment in general. You guys should try it and see what comes up.
In the morning of April 14, 1561, at daybreak, between 4 and 5 a.m., a dreadful apparition occurred on the sun, and then this was seen in Nuremberg in the city, before the gates and in the country, by many men and women. At first there appeared in the middle of the sun 2 blood-red semicircular arcs, just like the moon in its last quarter. And in the sun, above and below and on both sides, the color was blood. There stood a round ball of partly dull, partly black ferrous color. Likewise, there stood on both sides, and as a torus about the sun, such blood-red ones and other balls in large number, about 3 in a line and 4 in a square, also some alone. In between these globes there were visible a few blood-red crosses, between which there were blood-red strips, becoming thicker to the rear and in the front malleable like the rods of reed grass, which were intermingled, among them 2 big rods, one on the right, the other to the left, and within the small and big rods there were 3, also 4 and more globes. These all started to fight among themselves, so that the globes, which were first in the sun, flew out to the one standing on both sides. Thereafter, the globes standing outside the sun in the small and large rods flew into the sun. Besides, the globes flew back and forth among themselves and fought vehemently with each other for over an hour. And when the conflict in and again out of the sun was most intense, they became fatigued to such an extent that they all, as said above, fell from the sun down upon the earth as if they all burned, and they then wasted away on the earth with immense smoke. After all this, there was something like a black spear, very long and thick, sighted. The shaft pointed to the east, the point pointed west by Hans Glaser, letter painter of Nuremberg.
A century before Swedenborg, esoteric scholar Abbé de Villars wrote an exposé on the Rosicrucian practice of intermarrying with otherworldly females. Anonymously published in 1670, the Comte de Gabalis, the Count of Kabbalah, is one of the more intriguing of arcane sources pertaining to superhuman interactions with humans. Familiar to students of Rosicrucianism and alchemy, but lesser known to researchers of alienology, the book is full of anecdotes from esoterica and ancient history about the role these beings have played in our history. The work consists of 5 discourses between the author and a mysterious Rosicrucian initiate who revealed to him one of the society's most closely guarded secrets: that human spiritual elite have been intimately consorting with otherworldly beings. After its publication, de Villars was assassinated by ritual dagger, though some say he faked his death in order to disappear from the mainstream world, as all true Rosicrucian initiates must do. Either he was a genuine antagonist of the Rosicrucians and was killed for betraying a secret, or else he was an initiate who placed key knowledge into the public domain by veiling it in the form of sarcastic satire. The immense space which lies between earth and heaven has inhabitants far nobler than the birds and insects. These vast seas have far other hosts than those of the dolphins and whales. The depths of the earth are not for the moles alone, and the element of fire, nobler than the other 3, was not created to remain useless and empty. The air is full of an innumerable multitude of peoples whose faces are human, seemingly rather haughty, yet in reality tractable, great lovers of the sciences, cunning, obliging to the sages, and enemies of fools and the ignorant. Their wives and daughters have a masculine beauty like that of the Amazons. The earth is filled well nigh to its center with gnomes, people of slight stature, who are the guardians of treasures, minerals, and precious stones. They are ingenious, friends of man, and easy to govern. They furnish the children of the sages with all the money they require, and as the price of their service ask naught save the glory of being commanded. The Nomides, their wives, are small but very amiable, and their dress is exceedingly curious. Hear me to the end and know that the seas and rivers are inhabited as well as the air. The ancient sages called this race of people undines or nymphs. There are very few males among them, but a great number of females. Their beauty is extreme, and the daughters of men are not to be compared to them. As for the salamanders, flaming dwellers of the region of fire, they serve the philosophers, but do not seek their company eagerly, and their daughters and wives. The salamander women are beautiful, more beautiful even than any of the others, since they are of a purer element. I had not intended to speak about them, and was passing briefly over the description of these peoples, since you will see them yourself at your leisure, and with ease if you have the curiosity to do so. You will see their dresses, their food, their manners, their customs, and their admirable laws. Alienologists are mistaken when they view accounts of jinn, succubi, incubi, etc. exclusively as encounters with aliens, and likewise occultists and theologists are mistaken in thinking of aliens as mere demons, elementals, or jinn. Thought forms and aliens are 2 separate categories of life that are related but not mutually exclusive. The beauty of their intellects will charm you even more than that of their bodies, yet one cannot help pitying these unfortunates when they tell one that their souls are mortal and that they have no hope whatever of eternal enjoyment of the Supreme Being, of whom they have knowledge and whom they worship reverently. They will tell you that they are composed of the purest portions of the element in which they dwell, and that they have in them no impurities whatever, since they are made of but one element. Therefore, they die only after several centuries. But what is time in comparison with eternity? They must return forever into nothingness. This thought grieves them deeply, and we have utmost difficulty in consoling them. Our fathers, the philosophers, when speaking with God face to face, complained to him of the unhappiness of these peoples. and God, whose mercy is boundless, revealed to them that it was not impossible to find a remedy for this evil. He inspired them to the realization that just as man, by the alliance which he has contracted with God, has been made a participant in divinity, so the sylphs, gnomes, nymphs, and salamanders, by the alliance which they have it in their power to contract with man, can become participants in immortality. Thus, a nymph or a sylphid becomes immortal and capable of the beatitude to which we aspire when she is so happy as to marry a sage, and a gnome or a sylph ceases to be mortal the moment he espouses one of our daughters. Marvel at the extent of the philosophical felicity. Instead of women whose feeble allurements fade in a few days and are succeeded by horrible wrinkles, the sages possess beauties who never grow old and whom they have the glory of rendering immortal. Imagine the love and gratitude of these invisible mistresses and the ardor wherewith they strive to please the charitable philosopher who applies himself to their immortalization. The Rosicrucians were convinced out of pity and mutual benefit to mate with these beings and thereby gift them immortality, else these beings would die forever. That sounds more like a persuasive excuse than the actual truth, just as today's abductees are told that their participation in the hybrid breeding program is an opportunity to save the human race. They do seem to need us, but the reasons may be other than they claim. The sages are far from believing that the devil ever had power to make himself worshipped. He is too wretched and too weak ever to have had such pleasure and authority. But he has had power to persuade these hosts of the elements to show themselves to men and to cause temples to be erected in their honor. And by virtue of the natural dominion which each one of these peoples has over the element in which it dwells, they kept troubling the air and the sea, shaking the earth, and scattering the fire of heaven at their own good pleasure. Thus they had little difficulty in causing themselves to be mistaken for divinities, so long as the sovereign being neglected the salvation of the nations. This is the central thesis of the ancient astronaut theory that non-human beings posed as divinities to the ancients and held centers of worship. Egypt and Mesopotamia are examples. The founders of the Egyptian civilization were thought divine, and each was worshipped in his or her respective temple. After their death or departure, succeeding generations of pharaohs modeled themselves after these gods and were hailed as divine. Some may have been hybrids or descendants of hybrids, and some dynasties may have had more alien DNA than others, the 18th dynasty with Akhenaten in particular. A certain philosopher, with whom a nymph was engaged in an intrigue of immortality, was so disloyal as to love a woman. As he sat at dinner with his new paramour and some friends, there appeared in the air the most beautiful leg in the world. The invisible sweetheart greatly desired to show herself to the friends of her faithless lover, that they might judge how wrong he was in preferring a woman to her. Afterward, the indignant nymph killed him on the spot. I confess that their tenderness is apt to be somewhat violent, but if exasperated women have been known to murder their perjured lovers, we must not wonder that these beautiful and faithful mistresses fly into a passion when they are betrayed, and all the more so since they only require men to abstain from women whose imperfections they cannot tolerate, and give us leave to love as many of their number as we please. It stands to reason that if they look similar to humans and have compatible biology, then they can have similar emotional weaknesses depending on the spiritual maturity of each member. Despite romantic idealizations by contactees, they are not perfect beings. They may be superhuman by our low standards, but they still have their own set of psychological faults, emotional weaknesses, and physical limitations. They prefer the interest and immortality of their companions to their personal satisfaction, and they are very glad to have the sages give to their republic as many immortal children as possible. Compare this to what Eschenbach wrote. As I say, maidens are given away from the Grail openly, men in secret, in order to have progeny, as God can well instruct them, in the hope that these children will return to serve the Grail and swell the ranks of its company. The renowned Hercule and the invincible Alexander were sons of the greatest of the sylphs. Not knowing this, the historians said that Jupiter was their father. They spoke the truth for, as you have learned, these sylphs, nymphs, and salamanders set themselves up for divinities. The historians, believing them to be so, called all those who were born of them children of the gods. Such was the divine Plato, the most divine Apollonius of Tyana, Hercules, Achilles, Sarpedon, the pious Aeneas, and the celebrated Melchizedek. What would your doctor say to this authentic account of a recent occurrence in Spain? A beautiful sylphid was beloved by a Spaniard, lived with him for 3 years, presented him with 3 fine children, and then died. Shall one say that she was a devil? A clever answer that. According to what natural philosophy can the devil organize for himself a woman's body, conceive, bear children, and suckle them? What proof is there in Scripture of the extravagant power which your theologians are forced in this instance to accord the devil? And with what probable reason can their feeble natural philosophy supply them? The Jesuit Del Rio, in good faith, naively recounts several of these adventures, and without taking the trouble to give physical explanations, extricates himself by saying that those sylphids were demons. How true it is that your greatest doctors very often know no more than silly women. If you should be told, for example, that the divine Apollonius of Tyana was immaculately conceived, and that one of the noblest salamanders descended to immortalize himself with his mother, you would call that salamander a demon, and you would give the devil the glory of fathering one of the greatest men who ever sprang from our philosophic marriages. When you read that the celebrated Merlin was immaculately conceived by a nun, daughter of a king of Great Britain, and that he foretold the future more clearly than Tiresias, do not say with the masses that he was the son of an incubus devil, because there never have been any, nor that he prophesied through the assistance of devils, since according to the Holy Kabbalah, devil is the most ignorant of all beings. Rather say with the sages that the English princess was consoled in her retirement by a sylph who took pity on her, that he diverted her with his attentions, that he knew how to please her, and that Merlin, their son, was brought up by the sylph in all knowledge, and learned from him to perform the many wonders which English history relates of him. It's known in alienology that hybrid children seated in human families become extraordinary individuals. This is the most direct way that the parallel superhuman civilization influences ours, by inserting their own into our society. The aperture of human birth allows a level of influence otherwise barred by metaphysical decree. The Comte claims that the most powerful and influential heroes of history were hybrid offspring. As Eschenbach said, when the Grail members mate with humans, they receive handsome children of high degree. On the subject of human-alien interbreeding, a more modern example is the abduction of Antonio Villas-Boas in 1957. At the time of his alleged abduction, Antonio Villas-Boas was a 23-year-old Brazilian farmer who was working at night to avoid the hot temperatures of the day. On October 16, 1957, he was plowing fields near São Francisco de Sales when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky. According to his story, this star approached his position, growing in size until it became recognizable as a roughly circular or egg-shaped aerial craft, with a red light at its front and a rotating cupola on top. The craft began descending to land in the field, extending 3 legs as it did so. At that point, Boas decided to run from the scene. According to Boas, he first attempted to leave the scene on his tractor, but when its lights and engine died after traveling only a short distance, he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 1.5 meters, 5 foot, tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech it made noises like barks or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined the first in subduing Boas, and they dragged him inside their craft. Once inside the craft, Boas said that he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led into a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. Boas claimed that he was able to memorize these symbols and later reproduce them for investigators. In this room, the beings took samples of Boas's blood from his chin. After this, he was then taken to a third room and left alone for around half an hour. During this time, some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made Boas become violently ill. Shortly after this, Boas claimed that he was joined in the room by another humanoid. She was the same height as the other beings he had encountered, with a small, pointed chin and large blue cat-like eyes. The hair on her head was long and white. Boas said he was strongly attracted to the woman. During this act, Boas noted that the female did not kiss him, but instead nipped him on the chin. When it was all over, the female smiled at Boas, rubbing her belly and gestured upwards. Boas took this to mean that she was going to raise their child in space. The female seemed relieved that their task was over, and Boas himself said that he felt angered by the situation because he felt as though he had been little more than a good stallion for the humanoids. Boas said that he was then given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. During this tour, he said that he attempted to take a clock-like device as proof of his encounter, but was caught by the humanoids and prevented from doing so. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When Boas returned home, he discovered that 4 hours had passed. Antonio Villas Boas later became a lawyer, married, and had 4 children. He died in 1992 and stuck to the story of his alleged abduction for his entire life.
On April 23, 1897, a Kansas newspaper, the Yates Center Farmers Advocate, reported an incredible story. On the evening of April 19th, local rancher Alexander Hamilton, his son, and a hired man saw a giant cigar-shaped UFO hovering above a corral near the house. Hamilton claimed that in a carriage underneath the structure were 6 of the strangest beings I ever saw. Just then, the 3 men heard a calf bawling and found it trapped in the fence, a rope around its neck extending upward. "We tried to get it off, but could not," Hamilton said. "So we cut the wire loose to see the ship, heifer and all, rise slowly, disappearing in the northwest." The next day, Hamilton went looking for the animal. He learned that a neighbor had found the butchered remains in his pasture. The neighbor, according to Hamilton, was greatly mystified in not being able to find any tracks in the soft ground. Hamilton's statement was followed by an affidavit signed by a dozen prominent citizens who swore that, for truth and veracity, we have never heard Hamilton's word questioned. In the following days, his story was published in newspapers throughout the United States and even in Europe.
Ancient Aliens, the popular sci-fi meme, has yet to produce solid proof that extraterrestrials ever interacted with humans. Yet, unidentified flying objects have a surprisingly ancient history. The earliest UFO sightings were reported by Roman historians Livy, Orosius, Seneca, Plutarch, Pliny, and Josephus. The ancient sightings have been classified by a NASA scientist according to the standard UFO categories devised by astronomer J.A. Hynek, 1972. Close encounters of the first, no physical evidence; second, physical traces; and third kinds, occupants observed. The parallels to modern UFO sightings are eerie. For example, in 217 BC, numerous witnesses in Rome watched a group of shiny round shields of polished bronze moving across the sky. At the same time, in the countryside east of Rome, many people reported seeing mysterious forms of men completely dressed in shining white. 3 years later, people in northern Italy saw something like a large white marble altar in the sky, accompanied by human shapes clothed in brilliant white. In 154 BC, more flying shield-like discs appeared. One night, in 104 BC, people of 2 Italian towns watched as flaming spears and oblong-shaped shields rushed at each other in a kind of aerial battle. In 100 BC, a very large, round, shield-shaped object travelled across the sky. In 91 BC, a huge fiery disc was accompanied by a sonic, boom-like sound. Later that same day, people in Spoleto watched a UFO's vertical approach and takeoff as a great gold-colored ball rolled down from the sky towards Earth, then rose up again. In 74 BC, thousands witnessed a large, flaming object of molten silver crash land between two armies on a Roman battlefield in Turkey. The object was shaped like a large storage jar with a pointed bottom, something like a nose cone. In Rome, 43 BC, a spectacle of missiles and weapons and shields was seen to rise from the horizon up to the sky, with a loud clashing noise. A close encounter of the third kind reported in AD 150 with a spacecraft hovering and landing is uncannily similar to the 1977 Hollywood movie. On the main road from Rome to Capua, on a sunny day, an immense UFO about 100 feet across appeared overhead and moved downward. This object was flat and curved, like a huge piece of pottery or potsherd. The top of the object had many colors and shot out fiery rays of light. The UFO landed, raising a cloud of dust, and an occupant emerged, described as something like a maiden clad in white. The astronomical meteorologist who analyzed these Roman reports in Classical Journal, 2007, notes that the UFO phenomenon, whatever it may be due to, has not changed much over 2 millennia. Disc, elongated or sphere shapes, metallic, brilliant colors and materials, smooth, erratic or hovering motions, the object often vanishes. Whether these are extraordinary atmospheric effects, astronomical phenomena, or extraterrestrial encounters, the persistence of consistent details over thousands of years seems to point to something real observed by many witnesses over time, something that we do not yet understand.
It is no longer a secret. Decades of archaeological evidence and cryptic texts have revealed the shocking truth. Intelligent extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in antiquity and engineered us. The monumental structures such as the Great Pyramid of Giza and Stonehenge are undeniable proof of their advanced technology and influence on our civilization. The time for secrecy is over. It is time to embrace the extraordinary reality of our origins.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.